Welcome to a special edition of the Matt Sager podcast this Tuesday, February 5th of 2019. And yes, I am sick again, or still. It's not really clear to me. What happened was we got caught here in New York City, and many other parts of the country actually got it much worse. So please don't read this as me complaining, simply explaining why I sound like, I don't know, late-stage Jack Klugman. I am basically a healthy guy. But earlier this week, it was -8 degrees. Just a few days later, today, it is in the upper 50s and as high as 60 degrees. So the immune system, the human immune system, just does not like that. And some people take it especially hard. Some people's systems were just not meant. Like, if you weren't born late enough to sort of have natural defenses to this doomsday that Earth is really approaching between climate change and global warming, pollution, and of course, we may just all be conscripted to World War IV. But in the meantime, assuming none of that happens, I would really like a return of the season's spring and fall, so that if it's -10 degrees and you want it to be 50 or 60, it doesn't happen overnight, but it does build naturally toward that. Whereas, like, going up or down by more than 30 degrees in a single evening, it's the new normal now, and my body has not adapted. So for what it's worth, as bored as you are of hearing about it, I promise you I'm 1,000 times more bored, not only of feeling it, but really of saying it. Like, I really don't like when someone asks me how I'm doing, and like we haven't talked in a couple of months, right? And I had a cold then, and then they catch up with me a few months later and go, "Hey, how are you doing now?" And I go, "Oh, I'm sick again." It's really disheartening. You feel like you're being really depressing, and at the same time, you don't want to lie and be like, "Yeah, no, everything's great." So it's weird, but nothing I have is super dire or anything like that. I've got a virus that I can't kick. That is really the be-all and end-all of what's going on with me and why it's been going on for so long. Thing about a virus is you can't really get a cure for it. I mean, like if it was herpes, I could take Valtrex, but it's not. They don't even know what to call it. It's just something that is simulating a cold. Now, having said that, I'm still extremely excited about tonight's episode of the Matt Sager podcast because guess what, people? With your help, and by virtue of your support and loyalty, and I can't tell you how much that means to me, we have reached episode 100. Yeah. 100 episodes, and it's only the beginning. And it's all thanks to you. Thank you so much, and I cannot wait. Not only to kick this virus, but for another 100 episodes and many more besides. I love doing this. I love communicating with you. I love doing a show by my terms without a program director. Not that I'm incapable of working with one, but the freedom of podcasting to speak directly to you, to my audience, and to not be censored or have to telegraph my marketing, to be just 100% genuine. You know, on the one hand, there's more work involved. I had to set up my own sound, do my own production and post-production, and I'm still figuring out whether I'm going to stick with a daily format or to instead move to a long-form format with shows once a week or maybe 2 or 3 times per week. I'd be very interested in hearing what you've got to say about that, what your preference would be. So please get in touch with me. You can email matt@mattsager.com, call me at 646-535-4788, and if you listen to the end of tonight's podcast, I'll give out more ways to get in touch with me, more social media links, etc. So, following up on a story I did earlier on the Matt Sager podcast, what I thought was a done deal. I did an episode about the fact that the Oscars was going hostless because Kevin Hart's social media history, including stuff like tweets, which he later deleted, but which were accessible through the Wayback Machine or cached on Google, or many of the people who were offended by them took screen caps at the time. And he kind of sort of apologized a little bit. First, the Academy gave him the option of apologizing, and he rejected it. Then, cut to a few days later, and he's on Ellen DeGeneres' show, and she's saying, "I really want Kevin Hart to be the host. He shouldn't be punished." I say this as both a comic, as someone who has presented and received various awards, and as someone who, you know, this is obviously true of Ellen. She is a fairly prominent spokesperson for the LGBTQ community. But then he came on her show, and as she defended him, he still kind of dug in his heels and just didn't want to apologize. And look, that's his prerogative, just as it's the Oscars' prerogative to finally make it official that there will be no hosts. The episode I did earlier on this whole Oscars debacle is, I believe, episode 88, on an episode I called Starry Skits, in which I kind of touch on the fact that this is the first time in exactly 30 years that the Oscars are going hostless. And while I admire the effort of ABC, and I understand the quandary that they're in, like anybody you replace Kevin Hart with, the idea is that his social media got him fired. So what entertainer on earth doesn't have a super problematic social media history that would then call their ability to host, their legitimacy, their their inoffensiveness, that they could somehow be inoffensive to everyone, but funny and entertaining enough to everyone. Sadly, I'm not saying you got to be hateful or horrible or denigrate any groups to be amusing, but comedy actually is, at its best, laughing at the stuff that upsets us, upsetting the more powerful among us. I don't know how to explain it. There is a way of being very cruel, and if you understand that the audience is into it, it works. I like when my friends and I goof on each other, and that often extends into nasty subjects. But because of who I'm talking to and because of the context, I'm okay with it. Now, if I had a social media thing saying, the Irish are this, African Americans are that, members of the LGBTQ community are the other, I could certainly understand why I would not be considered for instance, hosting the Oscars. But again, anyone who would be worthy of the job, and I'm sure they did a lot of checking, is going to have another complicated social media history that might very well mean they've got to fire yet another host. And this already problematic situation, this very embarrassing situation for ABC, could only escalate and cascade for every time they brought in a new host. Someone said, no, here's what he said about, I guess I'm thinking about Gilbert Gottfried here, who, by the way, would be an amazing host at absolutely anything, but his social media has damaged him in the past. He is certainly not the clean, inoffensive host, if that's what they're looking for. Now, having said that, the idea that they're going to do all these skits and sketches that will involve many different performers, I don't know why it's any more likely that their social media history would not have offensive or, at the very least, questionable content. I would imagine that they would. So as these skits are announced, or as they roll out live, expect a lot of people to be very pissed at some members of these groups, some of the participants in the skits, because again, I don't know that there's anyone in the entertainment industry with an absolutely unimpeachable social media profile. I think that if you put any effort into poring over the social media accounts of the famous and those who will participate in the sketches and skits at the Oscars, they're all going to be problematic. But what's pretty astonishing to me is the way ABC is portraying. Again, I really thought this was a done deal a couple weeks ago, but today it's finally official. Somehow it wasn't before. There will definitely be no host for the 2019 Oscars. And ABC Entertainment President Carrie Burke tries desperately to slap lipstick on this pig, to claim a victory. No more oppressive hosts to guide you through a show and to entertain you. We finally made it. It's like Brexit, pretending to celebrate something that's not good. That was brought about by an unpleasant set of circumstances, and it's just the way it's got to be. But it is hardly a win for ABC to finally, after 30 years, admit there's no host who's up to the job. Some of these potential hosts have real, serious, not just jokes on their social media accounts, but really awful things that they've done and that they haven't really in any meaningful way atoned for or tried to seek atonement for. So it'll be interesting to see who goes after whom and for what cause. My experience of late, stuff like, for instance, James Gunn being fired from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 because a right-wing hate monger found tweets of his, old tweets that Gunn really should have removed, that were really, really stupid and offensive. And I don't think you're going to have people in these starry skits, starry sketches, or whatever you want to call them, who don't have something like that. Not quite as colorful as James Gunn's genuinely unfunny and distasteful tweets, but I think everyone at this show is going to have some baggage. But so Carrie Burke, in officially confirming this business of no hosts for the 2019 Oscars, spoke with a Hollywood Reporter, and she seems positively gleeful at this hostless Oscars. In fact, in addressing the issue with the Hollywood Reporter, saying first the confusion as to whether or not there would be a host, and then finally the announcement that there definitely won't be, she says, quote, "Ironically, I have found that the lack of clarity around the Oscars has kept them in the conversation. The mystery is really compelling. People really care." She went on to say that the Academy wisely decided not to have a host in order to, quote, "keep the show to a brisk 3 hours." Yeah, a brisk 3 hours. I'm sorry, but these shows are just masturbatory. The idea that we've got to make up for not having a host by just loading it up with bad, unpleasant, untasteful skits. Just have a 2-hour show. We really do have enough award shows. You don't need to make it 3 hours, brisk or otherwise. And I just want to remind you all, and in particular Carrie Burke and everyone at ABC, of what it was like the last time the Oscars went hostless. Here's a sketch from the '89 Oscars titled "The Stars of Tomorrow." Let's see if we recognize any of these people today. After all, the Stars of Tomorrow in 1989 would be stars of either today or even yesteryear by this point. I'm thinking we'll be looking at some real legends here, so let's take a look.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't recognize any of these people.
Gee, but it's great to be an Oscar winner. A super duper Oscar.
Keith Coogan. Anybody? Anybody know who this is? No idea. By the way, I'll attach a link to this video in the description for tonight's podcast episode. But the douche chill factor is just off the charts right now. But back to my point. Keith Coogan. Anybody? Anybody? All right then. More Stars of Tomorrow. Let's see.
I am most humbly impressed.
Patrick O'Neill. No idea who that is.
The Academy has voted me the...
Tyrone Power Jr. and Carrie Hamilton. I mean, yeah, I'm sure if we dig deeply enough in their IMDb profiles, we'll find something. Definitely not star material here. So hopefully they won't repeat that mistake by trying to predict anyone's trajectory of success and fame and stardom and potential Oscar-winning even performances. Let's maybe not do that this year. Let's go back and see if we recognize anybody else on this sketch, skit, song, just abortion, whatever you want to call it.
Very best. Now that I'm finally a statuetter, forgive me if I wear a...
Okay, Ricki Lake. She's technically a star of sorts. I mean, she's really talented, but I don't know that I would, based on her history, did she become a star of tomorrow? I don't know. Maybe call an audible and be generous and say, all right, this one's kind of correct.
Forgive me if I wear a silly smile. I said
Trisha Leigh Fisher. Anybody? Nope.
you bet. It took lots of sweat. But now I know the work I did was really worthwhile. An Oscar winner.
Oh, this is great. He's doing a full moonwalk. Guess who this star of tomorrow is? He's a lost boy. He's dressed like Sergeant Pepper paying a visit to the Neverland Ranch. Surely you know who this guy is, no? Let's take a listen and decide whether he ended up living up to this hype as an actual star of tomorrow.
An Oscar winner.
Now watch the agents treating me right.
There he goes. Corey Feldman. Watch the agents treating me right. I mean, I actually feel really, really sad for Corey Feldman. I also feel that he may be a danger. The videos that he promotes, the crazy conspiracy theories, the GoFundMes for $10 million so I can describe who molested me, and the ongoing battle with the family of Corey Haim. I mean, that's the only stuff that's keeping him in headlines. So he's more of an infamous D-lister of tomorrow, sadly. I do think he had talent, and I do think he was traumatized terribly by his family, by the industry, but ultimately, this isn't about my sympathy right now. This is about whether anyone deserved to be in this god-awful Oscar sketch. And I would say put Corey Feldman in the no column, sadly.
They'll stoop and grovel, all right, my novel. The title of the tale will be It Happened One Night. Gee, but it's great to join the list of giants who stood up.
This is so painful. I can't continue. I'm sorry. I'll attach a link to this video, as I said, in the description for tonight's podcast episode. Now I've got that stuck in my head. Gee, but it's great to be an Oscar winner. I'm very sorry if I planted that in your brain now. Welcome to my nightmare. Now, in a mixed bit of news here, some very exciting news and some sort of sad news, although I don't know that sad necessarily is the word. I believe that Legion was always going to end on its terms when it wanted, and before it went on for too long, got old, or started falling back on recurring plots. And it turns out that Legion, the amazing show that if you haven't been watching, you are really missing out. It turns out the plan with them was always to end after season 3, and sure enough, Legion's upcoming season 3 will be its last. Sadly, although I don't think this is what led to its downfall, I think they just wanted to tell their story and leave in their own time before it got old. But the unfortunate thing about Legion, and what's worth keeping in mind, just because it's an interesting trend, this is very similar to what happened to the Marvel Netflix shows. Turns out that everyone loved Legion season 1. Everyone I know certainly was addicted to it. Even my friends who hated comics, had no interest in them whatsoever, just really enjoyed the show for what it was, which, although it had Marvel characters, Legion is very, very unique. I would equate him closer to I don't know, if you're comparing him to the Marvel Netflix universe, he's more like the Punisher in that, all right, he's technically a Marvel property, but they went way off the reservation, took it to very exciting and imaginative heights. But like those Netflix series from Marvel, Legion had a precipitous drop in its ratings between seasons 1 and 2. So ultimately, they were going to leave anyway, but had they not been interested in doing so, they might have been given a push, and that's unfortunate. Now, in more cool comics news, one of my favorite writers, not just of comics, but television, film, Brian K. Vaughan, who's known for a lot of things, including one of my favorite comics of all time, the 50-issue series from Vertigo Comics, Ex Machina, in which he tells this amazing story about someone other than Michael Bloomberg being elected mayor in the 2000s. Someone who, as it happened, had been touched by some sort of dark, other-dimensional force, which gave him superpowers and a whole lot of trouble as well. I'm such a fan of Ex Machina. It might be because it's so specific to New York at the time, but I would certainly say that if you are a New Yorker, or if you're someone who loves New York very much, you hold the city near and dear to your heart, you like to keep up with its comings and goings, you cannot fail with Ex Machina. He's also got his ongoing Image series, one of my favorite comics, probably the last decade, Paper Girls, as for example. But one of the things for which he's most famous worldwide is the comic that Stephen King called one of the best he's ever read. And I would have to agree. Y the Last Man. That's been picked up by FX. And so, as always, with one door closing, another has opened. The story of Y the Last Man is somehow infinitely more timely now than it was at the time of its writing, which, for a story like this, is rather sad, but it is what it is. The best way to describe it, encapsulated without giving you any sort of spoilers, would be to say, try to imagine a kind of inverse version of The Handmaid's Tale. It is about that dystopic. It's not as horrific a hierarchy against the one man left in the world, but it's got enough similar traits to The Handmaid's Tale that if you like those kinds of stories, you'll almost certainly like this. And honestly, if you're at all a fan of the comic genre, you're probably already familiar with this and enjoy it. And if not, I highly recommend just go to Amazon, pick up Volume 1. It's fairly inexpensive. You can get it digitally at Comixology too if you want. I'll throw up a link in the description for this podcast. Either Y Volume 1, like a trade paperback or hardcover, or if there's an omnibus, maybe I'll put up a link to that as well. And if it shares anything in common with the outgoing Legion, FX will give lots and lots of latitude to the writers, director, producer, director of photography, etc., to really be experimental and go to cool, dark, new places. Tell these stories in very experimental ways. FX, I think, in what they've done with Legion, have proven themselves the best place for bold, new, non-superhero-specific comics properties. And I think Brian K. Vaughan is now quite familiar with the inner workings of the entertainment industry. And if he's excited about Y coming to FX, then that all but guarantees it's going to be amazing. So again, thank you so much. 100 episodes of the Matt Sager Podcast. Who would have ever thought? Certainly not I. And again, it's all thanks to you. But thank you so very, very much. And coming up very soon, my next 100 episodes. Thanks for sticking around. Get in touch with the Matt Sager Podcast. You can email me, matt@mattsager.com, or call 646-535-4788. Also, I'll be back tomorrow, hopefully, with this sore throat and stuff gone. You can also get me on social media. I'm at Matt Sager on Twitter. On Facebook, I've got various pages. My personal page is The Matt Sager. My voiceover page is Matt Sager VO, and this podcast page is Matt Sager Podcast. You can also find me on Instagram, where I'm Real Matt Sager, and I've got more social media links besides. You can find those along with my voiceover reels, contact information, archived back episodes of this podcast, articles, blog posts, and more at mattsagervoiceover.com. Also, check out the links in the description for tonight's podcast, both to that awful Oscars bed, The Stars of Tomorrow, and links for picking up Y the Last Man at Amazon. Those are going to be affiliate links, so if you end up buying them, I'll get like somewhere between 4 and 6%. Also in tonight's podcast episode description, links to my Patreon, patreon.com/Matt Sager, and my merch store from my friends at WeHaveMerch.com, where you can find all kinds of cool stuff with the Matt Sager Podcast logo, including t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, and stickers. Happy 100th episode, everyone. Thanks so much. Can't wait to do the next 100. Talk to you soon.